The Mafia king collapsed at her door, after being betrayed by his allies. Then he returned for her. Nobody, in that quiet little neighborhood, knew who Dante Morelli really was. And honestly, that was probably a good thing. To the outside world, he was a businessman. The kind of man who wore expensive suits, spoke in a calm voice, and never raised it, because he never had to. His name alone was enough to make people listen. For 15 years, he had run the most powerful crime family in Naples, Italy. He had inherited a broken organization at the age of 23, after his father was shot dead in broad daylight, and he had rebuilt it from almost nothing, through patience, sharp thinking, and an iron grip on the people around him. He turned it into something that even the police were careful about touching. He was feared, he was respected, and for a long time, he believed that was enough. But on a cold October night, everything fell apart. And it happened because of the one person Dante had trusted most. Luca had been with Dante for over a decade. He was not just a lieutenant, he was the man Dante had treated like a younger brother. Luca sat at every important table, heard every important conversation, and had access to things no one else did. And for years, he played the role of loyal second-in-command perfectly. What Dante did not know was that Luca had been planning his removal for a long time. Luca had been quietly making deals with a rival family from Calabria, the very people Dante had spent years keeping at a distance. Luca had promised them territory, money, and one thing more, Dante's head. The meeting that night was supposed to be a simple negotiation. Luca had arranged it. He had told Dante it was safe. He had vouched for every man in that warehouse, shaking Dante's hand before they walked in. The ambush started within minutes. Dante took 2 bullets, one in his left shoulder, one along his side. His guards were overwhelmed. In the chaos, he did what 15 years of surviving had taught him. He moved. He found a broken exit in the back wall and pulled himself through it, out into the rain, bleeding and alone. He did not know where he was going. He just kept moving. He walked for nearly 2 hours in the dark, the cold rain soaking through his suit, his hand pressed against his side. He had no phone, no backup, nothing. At some point, his legs simply stopped carrying him. He collapsed in the corridor of a small apartment building on the edge of the city. The last thing he remembers thinking, before everything went blurry, was that he was probably going to die on someone's doorstep, and that there was something almost embarrassing about that. Nadia heard the sound just after 2 in the morning. She was not sleeping. She rarely slept well those days. She had been sitting at her small kitchen table with a cup of tea and a medical textbook, the kind of quiet night she had gotten used to since moving to Naples 3 years ago. She was a nurse at a hospital nearby, a good one, the kind of nurse other nurses came to when they had questions. She was careful, steady, and not easily rattled. But even she was not prepared for what she found when she opened her front door. A man was on the floor of the hallway, large, dark-haired, dressed in what had once been a very expensive shirt. He was soaked through and bleeding badly from his shoulder and side. His eyes were open, barely, and he was conscious enough to look up at her when the door opened. She did not scream. She did not slam the door. She stood there for exactly 3 seconds, looking at him. Then the nurse in her took over. She crouched down. She checked his pulse. She looked at the wounds. Before she could reach for her phone, his hand came up and closed around her wrist. Not violently, just firmly. His eyes, even through the pain, were steady and direct. "No hospital," he said. His voice was rough, barely above a whisper. "No police. If you call anyone tonight, we are both in danger." Nadia looked at him for a long moment. She looked at the blood on her floor. She looked at the absolute seriousness in his face. This was not a threat, she realized. This was a man telling her a fact. She made a decision. She put her phone back in her pocket. She got her medical kit. The next 3 days were unlike anything in her life. Dante was not an easy patient. He was used to being in control, and lying in a stranger's spare room, dependent on someone else's hands to clean his wounds, went against everything in him. But he was also smart enough to know he had no choice. The infection that came on the second day was serious. Nadia handled it without drama. She quietly called a former colleague she trusted, gave a vague story, and got what she needed. She changed his dressings. She monitored his temperature through the night. She made food he did not ask for, and left it beside the bed without saying anything about it. He watched her. That was the thing about Dante. He was always watching, always reading people. It was how he had stayed alive this long. What he saw in her was not what he expected. She was not nervous around him, which was unusual. Most people, when they sensed what kind of man he was, became careful and small around him. She did not. She moved around her own apartment, like he was simply a person who needed medical attention, not a problem to manage, or a threat to survive. She was not warm in an obvious way. She was practical, quiet, a little tired around the eyes, but she was also, underneath all of that, clearly kind. There was a photograph on her windowsill, a younger version of her, laughing, beside a man who was not in her life anymore. Dante did not ask about it, but he noticed. On the second night, when she brought him water and sat in the chair by the door to check his temperature again, he asked her why she had not called for help. She thought about it for a moment. "Because you were on my floor and you were hurt," she said. "And I know how to help people who are hurt. That is what I do." "That is not a reason to take a risk like this," he said. "Maybe not," she said simply, and went back to writing in her notebook. He did not know what to say to that, so he said nothing. But something shifted in him, quietly that night. On the fourth day, one of Dante's surviving men, a young, loyal soldier named Cesare who had been quietly tracking signals for days, found his way to the building. Dante had sent a coded message through a secondary channel he had set up years ago for exactly this kind of situation. He had 2 men left out of the original group, Cesare and an older advisor named Berto, who had retired to Sicily but had received the message and was already moving. Meanwhile, in the city, Luca had made his move fast. He had announced to the organization that Dante was dead. He had taken control of the family's operations within 48 hours, which told Dante everything he needed to know about how long this had been planned. A police commissioner named Ferrante appeared at Nadia's door on the 5th day. He was alone, out of uniform, and had a look on his face that said he already knew things he was not supposed to know. This was not unusual for Ferrante. He had spent 30 years building connections on both sides of the law, and information was his real currency. He looked past Nadia at the man sitting at the kitchen table, still bandaged, still pale, but upright now, and did not seem surprised. "You have a choice," Ferrante said to Dante, pulling up a chair without being asked. "I help you disappear, permanently. No one ever finds you. Or I help you go back in. But one day, you will owe me something." Dante looked at him. "Define something." Ferrante named a favor. Dante said he would think about it. He was not the kind of man who made decisions under pressure, even when the pressure was significant. Nadia, standing in her own kitchen listening to this conversation, felt the full weight of what had happened 5 days ago when she opened that door. She had known, on some level, what kind of man had come into her home. She had grown up in this city. She was not naive. But knowing something and feeling it are different things. And standing there that morning, she felt it clearly. Her life had changed. She had not chosen it, but it had changed anyway. Dante healed, slowly, then more steadily. He began to move around the apartment in the evenings. He used her table to work through notes he made by hand. He kept his voice low when Cesare came by. He was careful, in a way that surprised her, not to bring the full weight of his world into her space. They talked sometimes in the evenings. Not about dangerous things, about small things. What she was studying, what Naples had been like 20 years ago, whether the coffee from the place downstairs was actually as good as they claimed. Normal conversations, the kind that fill the space between 2 people getting used to each other. One evening, she asked him what he had wanted his life to look like when he was young. Before everything. He was quiet for a moment. It was the kind of question nobody had ever asked him. "Simpler," he said finally. "I think I wanted something simpler." She nodded, like she understood that. "Me too," she said. By the end of the second week, he was well enough to leave. He knew it. She knew it. On the morning he left, he stood at her door with his coat on and said quietly, "I will not forget what you did." "You do not owe me anything," she said. "That is not what I said," he told her. Then he was gone. The next 3 months were difficult in ways that had nothing to do with Nadia. Dante moved carefully and quietly, using the small network of people still loyal to him. Cesare was dependable. Berto brought experience and old contacts. Ferrante, for his own reasons, kept certain pieces of information away from the wrong people at the right moments. Luca's hold on the organization was strong on the surface, but rotten underneath. He had built it fast and on fear, and people who follow a leader out of fear are always looking for a reason to stop. Dante did not rush. He worked slowly, making the right conversations happen, reminding the right people of the right things. One by one, without anything dramatic, Luca's support began to fall away. When the end came for Luca's control, it came without noise. That was the Dante way. Afterwards, when things had settled and Dante sat alone in his restored office for the first time, he found himself doing something he had not done in years. He sat still and thought about what he actually wanted. The answer came quickly, and it surprised him. He showed up at her door in January. No emergency this time, no blood. He was clean and rested, and standing there like a man who had thought about this more than once before doing it. Nadia opened the door and looked at him for a long moment. "You are alive," she said. "Yes, I heard some things. About what happened. About Luca. Most of what you heard is probably true," he said. She leaned against the doorframe, arms folded. Not unfriendly, just careful. "Why are you here, Dante?" He looked at her directly. He had spent his whole life being indirect in one way or another. It was how you survived in his world. But he was tired of it, and she deserved something honest. "Because the 2 weeks I spent in your apartment were the only 2 weeks in 15 years that felt like rest," he said. "I do not know how to explain it better than that." Nadia was quiet for a moment. A small smile crossed her face. "That is a strange reason to come back," she said. "I know," he said, "but it is the true one." She stepped back from the door. "You better come in," she said. "The coffee downstairs really is as good as they claim." What came after was not simple. Nothing between two people like them could be simple. There were hard conversations about who he was, about what her life could and could not look like, about the lines she needed him to respect. There were nights when the weight of his world sat between them, like something heavy neither of them had asked to carry. There were moments when she wondered if she had made a mistake, and moments when she was very sure she had not. But he listened. That was the thing about Dante that kept surprising her. For a man who had spent his life giving orders, he had a real capacity to sit and listen to her, not to manage her or reassure her with empty words, just to actually hear what she said. She did not take that lightly. He, on the other hand, found himself doing something he had not done in a very long time. He began to think about the future, not just strategy and survival, and the next problem to solve, but a real future. Something with different things in it, something quieter. It took time, real things always do. A year and a half later, Dante found a house on the edge of the city, small garden in the back, a neighborhood where the streets were quiet in the evenings, and the neighbors did not ask too many questions. He sorted the paperwork and said nothing about it until everything was ready. He took Nadia to see it on a Sunday morning. She walked through the empty rooms slowly, looking at everything, the light coming through the kitchen window, the garden with its overgrown grass, the small bedroom at the back that looked out over the rooftops. She came back to the kitchen doorway and stood there looking at him. "You found this," she said. "I found it for us," he said. "If you want it." She looked at the window, at the garden, at the quiet, ordinary shape of the life that was sitting right there in front of her, waiting to see if she would take it. She had wanted the ordinary version of things once, the one where nothing too big or too strange ever happened. That version was gone, but this one, this strange, unlikely, arrived at the wrong time version, felt, somehow, like something she could build on. "I want it," she said, and that was enough.